The medical station called Horizon's Rest floated in the darkness of space, orbiting a star that was slowly dying. It was a huge structure, built by many species working together, and it served as a place where anyone from any world could come for healing. Thousands of beings lived and worked there. Doctors from dozens of planets walked its halls. Ships arrived every day, carrying the sick and the injured from across the galaxy. Yuna had been living on the station for almost 3 years now. She was a human woman in her early 30s, with short black hair that she never bothered to style properly and dark circles under her eyes from too many late nights. She worked as a xenobiologist, which meant she studied the bodies of alien species and tried to understand how they worked. It was difficult work, and most of the other doctors on the station did not take her very seriously. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only made contact with other species about 40 years ago, and in the eyes of the older civilizations, they were still children. Their medicine was considered basic. Their technology was generations behind. When Yuna spoke in meetings, the senior doctors would nod politely and then ignore everything she said. But Yuna did not mind too much. She had not come to space to impress anyone. She had come because she was curious, and because she believed that sometimes the simplest ideas could solve the hardest problems. On the day, everything changed. Yuna was sitting alone in the station's cafeteria, eating a bowl of noodles and reading research papers on her tablet. The cafeteria was a large open space with windows that looked out at the stars. Different species sat at different tables, eating foods that their bodies could handle. The air was filled with the sounds of many languages being translated by the station systems. Yuna was so focused on her reading that she almost did not notice the commotion near the main entrance. A family had arrived. They were Tovani, a species that Yuna had studied but never treated. The Tovani were tall beings, almost 2 meters in height, covered in thick fur that could be brown or gray or black. What made them special was the glowing patterns on their skin. These markings produced soft light in different colors, and they changed based on the Tovani's emotions. It was like wearing your feelings on your body for everyone to see. The 2 adult Tovani were clearly in distress. Their markings were flickering between dark purple and sickly yellow, colors that Yuna knew meant grief and fear. The male was tall and broad, with fur the color of dark wood. The female was slightly smaller, with lighter fur and markings that had once been beautiful, but now looked dim and faded. Between them, they carried a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. A child. A cub, as the Tovani called their young. Yuna set down her chopsticks and watched as the family was met by station, security, and medical staff. She could not hear what they were saying from this distance, but she could see the way the doctors were shaking their heads. She could see the way the mother's markings went completely dark for a moment. Like all hope had left her body without really thinking about it. Yuna stood up and walked toward the group as she got closer. She could hear the conversation through her translator. "We are sorry," one of the senior doctors was saying. He was a Velthari, a species that looked somewhat like tall, thin birds with scales instead of feathers. His name was Taiho, and he was the chief medical officer of the station. "We have examined your daughter's readings. There is nothing we can do." "You have not even looked at her," the father said. His voice was deep and rough, and his hands were shaking as he held his daughter. "You have only looked at data on a screen." "The data is clear," Taiho replied. His tone was not unkind, but it was final. "Your cub has failed to complete her first awakening. Her consciousness never fully connected to her body. This condition has no treatment. I am truly sorry." The mother made a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of a heart breaking. Yuna pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. "Excuse me," she said. "Can I see those readings?" Taiho turned to look at her. His expression was one of tired patience. Dr. Yuna, this is not your area of expertise. I know, but I have studied Torvani neurology. Just let me look. For a moment, she thought Taiho would refuse. But then the mother spoke. Let her see, Yumbi said. That was her name. Yuna would learn later. Let anyone see who wants to help. Taiho sighed and handed over his tablet. Yuna took it and began scrolling through the data. She saw brain scans, neural activity charts, and biological readings that she only half understood. But something caught her eye. A pattern in the neural activity that looked wrong, but also strangely familiar. She had seen something like this before. Not in any alien, but in old human technology. Back on Earth, before the contact with other species, computers would sometimes get stuck in what engineers called a boot loop. The machine would try to start up, fail, and then try again, over and over forever. The screen would show the same loading image until someone forced the system to reset completely. The cub's brain activity looked exactly like that. Her consciousness was trying to wake up, failing, and then trying again. She was stuck in a loop. How long has she been like this? Yuna asked. The father, whose name was Dohwan, looked at her with desperate eyes. 6 weeks. She should have awakened at 6 months old. That time passed, and she simply did not wake up. She breathes. Her heart beats. But she is not there. Yuna looked at the small bundle in his arms. She could see a tiny face covered in soft gray fur. The cub's eyes were half open but empty, seeing nothing. Her markings, which should have been bright with the energy of youth, were barely visible. Her name is Bomi, Yumbi said softly. It means precious. Yuna felt something twist in her chest. She looked back at the data, then at the cub, then at the grieving parents. I might be able to help, she said. But I need to warn you. My idea is going to sound completely insane. Dawan's markings flickered with something that might have been hope. We have traveled across 4 star systems. Every doctor has told us our daughter will die. At this point, we will listen to anything. Yuna took a deep breath. She knew that what she was about to say would make her sound like a fool. She knew that Taiho and the other doctors would think she had lost her mind. But she also knew that if she said nothing, this little cub would fade away, and she would never forgive herself. I think, Yuna said slowly, that your daughter's brain is stuck, like a machine that cannot finish starting up. I think I know how to restart it. The silence that followed was absolute. The conference room on the medical station was cold and quiet. Yuna stood at one end of a long table, facing a group of doctors who looked at her like she had grown a second head. Taiho sat at the center, his scaled face showing no emotion. Around him were specialists from 5 different species, all of them senior physicians with centuries of combined experience. Dohwan and Umbi sat in the corner, holding their daughter close. They had refused to leave, even when Taiho suggested that the discussion might be too technical for them. Yumbi had simply looked at him and said, "She is our child. We stay." Yuna pulled up a holographic display showing Bomi's neural scans. The image floated in the air above the table, a 3-dimensional map of the cub's brain activity. Patterns of light pulsed through it in repeating waves. Look at this sequence, Yuna said, pointing to a section of the display. You can see here that the neural activity follows the same pattern every 47 seconds. It builds up, reaches a peak, and then collapses. Then it starts again from the beginning. One of the doctors, a large being covered in blue fur named Hejin, leaned forward. We have seen this data. It shows that the cub's awakening process keeps failing. This is not new information. You are right, Yuna agreed. But you are looking at it as a biological failure. I am looking at it as a system error. Taiho made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a hiss. Dr. Yuna, the Tervani brain is not a computer. It is one of the most complex organic structures in the known galaxy. You cannot compare it to human machines. I am not saying they are the same thing, Una replied. She kept her voice calm, even though her heart was beating fast. I am saying that the pattern is similar. When a computer gets stuck in a boot loop, it keeps trying to load its operating system and failing. The only way to fix it is to force a complete shutdown and then restart everything fresh. The room was silent. Una could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on her. You want to shut down a child's brain, Hajin said slowly, and hope that it starts working when you turn it back on. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Yes, Una said honestly. I do. But I also understand that if we do nothing, Bomi will die. Her body will keep breathing for a while longer, but her mind will never wake up. She will fade away, and her parents will have to watch it happen. She looked over at Dowan and Unbi. The father's jaw was tight, and his markings were dark with suppressed emotion. The mother was stroking her daughter's fur with gentle fingers, her eyes fixed on the tiny face that showed no response. I have studied Torvani neurology for 2 years, Una continued. I know that the awakening process is like a program that runs automatically when a cub reaches the right age. It connects their consciousness to their body and allows them to become fully aware. In Bomi's case, something went wrong at a critical moment. The program started but could not finish. Now it keeps trying and failing over and over. Taiho stood up from his chair. He was taller than Una, and when he looked down at her, his eyes were hard. Even if your theory is correct, which I doubt, what you are proposing is impossible. To shut down a Tovani cub's higher brain functions would require equipment we do not have. And the risk of permanent damage is almost certain. I can modify a human neural therapy device, Una said. It would take me about 12 hours. The device is designed to interrupt harmful thought patterns in human patients. If I adjust the frequencies, I believe I can use it to break the loop in Bomi's brain. You believe, Taiho repeated. You are asking us to let you experiment on a dying child based on something you believe. I am asking you to let me try when no one else will. The room fell silent again. The other doctors exchanged looks, and Una could see that most of them had already made up their minds. They thought she was a fool, a young human who did not know her place. But then Umbi spoke. Dr. Una. Her voice was soft but steady. If you do this thing, what is the worst that can happen? Una turned to face the mother. She owed her the truth. The worst is that I could damage your daughter's brain beyond repair. She could die immediately instead of slowly. Or she could survive but be empty, a body with no one inside. Yumbi nodded slowly. She looked down at Bomi, at the blank eyes and the dim markings, at the little chest that rose and fell with each shallow breath. She is already empty, Yumbi said quietly. My daughter left us 6 weeks ago. What remains is only her shadow. If there is any chance at all, that you can bring her back, I want you to try. Dowan put his hand on his wife's shoulder. His markings were flickering between fear and something else. Something that looked like desperate hope. I do not understand human medicine, he said. I do not understand how a machine can be like a brain. But I understand that you are the only one in this room who's not telling us to give up. That is worth something. He looked at Taiho, and there was a challenge in his eyes. We give our consent. Let the human try. Taiho's expression did not change, but Una could see the tension in his body. He did not like this. He did not like being overruled by grieving parents. But he was also a doctor, and he knew that he had nothing better to offer. Very well, he said at last. But I want it on record that I oppose this procedure. And Dr. Una, if that child dies because of your experiment, you will face a full review board. Your career on this station will be over. Una met his eyes without flinching. I understand, She turned back to Dowan and Yumbi. I need 12 hours to prepare. You should rest if you can. Tomorrow, we try to wake your daughter. As she left the conference room, Yuna felt the weight of what she had just promised settle onto her shoulders. She had convinced them to let her try something that had never been done before. Something that might kill a child if she was wrong. She walked through the station's corridors toward her laboratory, her mind already racing through the modifications she would need to make. She did not notice the young intern who fell into step beside her until the girl spoke. Dr. Yuna? I heard what happened in the meeting. I want to help. Yuna looked over at the speaker. She was a Kelvari, a species that looked somewhat like humans, but with pale lavender skin and large dark eyes. Her name was Jie, and she had been assigned to Yuna's department 3 months ago. She was young and eager, and had not yet learned to be afraid of failure. This is going to be dangerous, Yuna warned. If things go wrong, anyone involved will share the blame. Jihee's expression did not waver. I know, but I also know that little girl is going to die if someone does not do something. I would rather try and fail than do nothing at all. Despite everything, Yuna felt a small smile cross her face. That is exactly how I feel. Come on. We have a lot of work to do and not much time to do it. They walked together toward the laboratory, 2 young doctors from different worlds. United by stubbornness and hope behind them on the other side of the station. Yumbi held her daughter close and whispered words of love into ears that could not hear. She did not know if the human doctor could really help. She did not know if tomorrow would bring miracle or tragedy. But for the first time in 6 weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her precious Bomi might come back to her. The laboratory was a mess. Tools and wires covered every surface. Empty cups of coffee stood in small armies on the counters. The air smelled like burned metal and stress. Yuna had not slept in 31 hours, and her hands were shaking slightly as she made the final adjustments to the device. It looked like a crown made of silver wire and small blinking lights. The original design was meant to help human patients who suffered from nightmares or harmful thoughts. It would send gentle signals into the brain to interrupt negative patterns and allow healthier ones to form. Yuna had taken that simple idea and turned it into something much more dangerous. Jie sat at a computer nearby, running calculations for the 100th time. Her lavender skin had gone pale with exhaustion, and her large eyes were red from staring at screens all night. The frequency modulation is ready, she reported. But Yuna, I have to say this one more time. The margin for error is almost nothing. If the signal is too strong, we could destroy your neural pathways completely. If it is too weak, nothing will happen. I know. Yuna held up the device and examined it in the light. Such a small thing to hold so much hope and fear. We will start at the lowest setting and increase slowly. We watch her brain activity every second. The moment we see the loop break, we stop. And if it does not break? Yuna did not answer. She did not have a good answer to give. The door to the laboratory opened, and Dowan entered carrying Bomi in his arms. Yumbi followed close behind. They both looked like they had not slept either. The father's fur was messy and unkempt, and the mother's markings were so dim they were almost invisible. We are ready, Dowan said. His voice was rough. Whatever happens, we want to be here. Yuna nodded and gestured to a medical bed in the center of the room. Please lay her down gently. I need to attach the sensors first. Dowan placed his daughter on the bed with infinite care, as if she were made of glass. Bomi did not react at all. She lay there with her eyes half open, breathing slowly, existing but not living. Her small body looked even smaller on the adult-sized bed. Yuna began attaching sensors to the cub's head. They were small circular pads that would monitor her brain activity in real time. As she worked, she talked to the parents in a calm voice. The procedure will happen in 2 stages. First, I will send a signal that interrupts the loop her brain is stuck in. This is the dangerous part. Her neural activity will drop very low, maybe to nothing. It will look like she is dying. Umbi made a small sound of distress. Dawan put his arm around her. The second stage, Yuna continued, is the restart. Once the loop is broken, I will stimulate specific areas of her brain in a careful sequence. This should trigger the awakening process to begin again, but correctly this time. Should, Dohwan repeated. You are not certain. No, Yuna admitted. I am not. Nothing like this has ever been tried before. I am working from theory and hope. But I believe it will work. I have to believe it, or I could not do this. She finished attaching the last sensor and stepped back to check the monitors. All of them showed the same repeating pattern they had shown for 6 weeks. The endless loop of failure. GA, bring me the device. The young intern carried the silver crown over to the bed. Her hands were steady, but Yuna could see the fear in her eyes. They were about to do something that could save a life or end it. There was no middle ground. Yuna carefully placed the device on Bomi's head. The cub did not react. She never reacted to anything anymore. Recording everything, Jihei said, her fingers moving over her tablet. Medical logs are active. If anything goes wrong, at least other doctors will be able to learn from our mistakes. It was a dark thing to say, but Yuna appreciated the honesty. Science moved forward through failure as much as success. If this did not work, at least their attempt would teach others what not to do. Doan, Yumbi, Yuna said, turning to the parents. I need you to stand back by the wall. Not because you are in the way, but because if something goes wrong, I need to be able to move quickly without worrying about anyone else. The parents nodded and moved to the far side of the room. They held each other's hands so tightly that their knuckles went white. Yuna took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Her mouth was dry. Every part of her body was screaming that this was a terrible idea, that she should stop now before it was too late. But then she looked at Bomi, at the tiny cub who had never gotten to open her eyes and really see the world. At the child who had never spoken a word or taken a step or laughed at something funny. At the daughter whose parents had crossed the galaxy looking for someone who would not give up on her. Yuna could not give up either. Beginning stage 1, she said. Jie, watch the monitors. Tell me everything you see. She activated the device. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The silver crown glowed softly, and a low humming sound filled the room. Bomi lay still on the bed, unchanged. Then the monitors began to shift. Neural activity is fluctuating, Jihei reported, her voice tense. The loop pattern is becoming unstable. The peaks are getting smaller. Yuna watched the screens with fierce concentration. The wave pattern that had been so regular for 6 weeks was starting to break apart. It was like watching a machine finally wind down after running on empty for too long. Increasing signal strength by 10%, Yuna said. She adjusted a dial on the device. The humming grew louder. Bomi's body twitched slightly, the first voluntary movement she had made in weeks. The loop is collapsing, Jihei said. Her voice was rising with excitement and fear. Neural activity dropping rapidly. 40% of baseline. 30%. 20%. Yumbi let out a cry of alarm. On the monitors, the lines that represented Bomi's brain activity were falling towards 0. It looked exactly like death. Hold steady, Yuna said, though her own heart was trying to escape her chest. This is what we expected. The loop has to collapse completely before we can restart. 10%, Jihei said. 5%. Yuna, she's almost flatlined. I know. Get ready to begin stage 2 on my mark. The monitors showed a single line. No peaks, no valleys, no patterns at all. Bomi's higher brain functions had stopped completely. For this one moment, the child's consciousness did not exist. Yuna had never felt so scared in her entire life. "Now," she said. "Stage 2. Initiate restart sequence." GA pressed a button on her tablet. The device on Bomi's head changed its tone, the hum becoming a series of gentle pulses. Each pulse was designed to stimulate a different part of the brain, like pressing keys on a piano in a specific order to play a song. First pulse, nothing. Second pulse, a tiny flicker on the monitor's. Third pulse. The flicker grew stronger. "Something is happening," GA whispered. "Brain activity returning. But it is different now. The pattern is not repeating." Yuna leaned closer to the screens. She could see it too. The neural activity was building, but it was not falling into the same trap as before. It was moving forward, progressing through stages that should have happened months ago. "The awakening sequence is initializing properly," Yuna said. She could barely believe what she was seeing. "It is working. It is actually working." Fourth pulse. Fifth pulse. Sixth pulse. The monitors showed brain activity climbing higher and higher. Bomi's markings, which had been almost invisible, began to glow. Soft colors appeared on her skin, first pale pink, then warming into gold and blue. "Oh," Yumbi breathed. "Oh, look at her. Look at my baby." Yuna removed the device from Bomi's head. The procedure was complete. Whatever happened next would happen on its own. For a long moment, nothing changed. Bomi lay still, her markings glowing softly, her brain activity strong and stable for the first time in her life. Then her eyes moved. Not the empty, unseeing stare that had haunted her parents for 6 weeks. Real movement, focus, awareness. Bomi's eyes found her mother's face, and something in them lit up with recognition. And then she opened her mouth and screamed. The scream was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard before. It was not a cry of pain or fear. It was not the wail of a hungry infant or the shriek of a frightened child. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to contain every emotion at once. Bomi screamed like someone who had just been pulled out of a dark and silent void and thrown into a universe that was too bright, too loud, too overwhelming, and too much. Her small body went rigid on the bed. Her markings exploded with color, flashing through every shade of blue and gold and purple and red so fast that it was almost blinding. Her tiny hands clenched into fists, and her eyes went wide with what could only be described as pure, absolute outrage. Umbi and Dolan rushed forward, but they stopped halfway across the room, frozen by the sight of their daughter, truly alive for the first time. Yumbi had her hands pressed to her mouth, and tears were streaming down her face. Dowan's markings were blazing with so much emotion that they cast colored shadows on the walls. GA stood by her monitors, staring at the readings with her mouth hanging open. The neural activity charts showed levels that were completely off the scale. A mind that was processing 6 months of sensory input all at once. And Yuna, exhausted and stressed and running on nothing but coffee and desperate hope, did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She started laughing. It began as a small sound, a single burst of air that escaped before she could stop it. But once it started, she could not make it stop. The laughter poured out of her like water from a broken dam, loud and uncontrolled and completely inappropriate for the situation, because the situation was absurd. The whole thing was absurd. She had just performed an impossible procedure based on a crazy theory. She had turned off a child's brain and turned it back on again, like a broken computer. She had risked everything, her career, her reputation, her place on the station, and the result was a tiny furry alien screaming at the top of her lungs like the universe had personally offended. Her Bomi was not crying because she was hurt. She was crying because she was angry. Yuna could see it in the way her little face was scrunched up, in the way her markings were flashing with hot, bright colors. This was not a child in pain. This was a child who had just woken up and decided that existence was completely unacceptable. Yuna laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. She laughed until her stomach hurt, and she had to lean against the medical console to keep from falling over. She laughed because she had been so scared for so long, and now it was over, and the relief was too big to express any other way. Jie was staring at her with horror. From a medical perspective, this was deeply unprofessional. A senior doctor laughing while a patient screamed was not exactly textbook behavior, but then Yunbi made a sound. It started as a sob, but somewhere in the middle, it transformed. The sob became a laugh, wet with tears but bright with joy. She laughed because her daughter was alive, really alive, for the first time. She laughed because 6 weeks of grief and despair had just been lifted from her shoulders. She laughed because the sound of Bomi screaming, as loud and angry as it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. Dawan tried to maintain his composure. He was a dignified man, a proud father, and he had spent the last 6 weeks being strong for his family. But the sound of his wife's laughter broke through his walls. A deep rumbling sound started in his chest, and before he knew it, he was laughing too. His markings shifted from the dark colors of grief to warm oranges and yellows, colors of happiness that had not appeared on his skin in almost 2 months. The three of them stood there laughing while Bomi screamed, and the combination of sounds was so strange and wonderful that even Jie started to smile. She did not quite laugh, but the corners of her mouth turned up, and her eyes filled with tears of relief. Bomi's screaming began to quiet. The initial shock of existence was fading, replaced by confusion and curiosity. She looked around the room with her newly awakened eyes, taking in the lights and the people and the strange equipment. Her markings settled into a pattern of blue and silver, colors that Yuna did not recognize. "Those colors," Yunbi said, moving closer to the bed. "I have never seen them before. What do they mean?" Yuna wiped the tears from her eyes and checked her tablet. "According to my research on Torvani patterns, that combination indicates wonder. She is amazed by everything she sees." Yunbi reached out and gently touched her daughter's cheek. Bomi's eyes focused on her mother's face, and her markings shifted again, adding warm pink to the blue and silver. "She knows me," Yunbi whispered. "She knows who I am." "Of course she does," Yuna said. Her voice was rough from laughing. "She has been listening to you for 6 months, even if she could not respond. Your voice, your heartbeat, your smell, they are all recorded in her memory. You are the first thing she truly recognizes." Dawan moved to stand beside his wife. When Bomi's eyes found him, her markings changed again, adding streaks of gold. She made a small sound, not a scream this time, but something softer. A questioning noise. "Hello, little one," Dawan said. His voice cracked on the words. "Welcome to the world. We have been waiting for you for a very long time." Bomi reached up with one tiny hand. Her movements were clumsy and uncoordinated, the movements of a mind that was still learning how to control a body. But her intention was clear. She was reaching for her father. Dawan took her hand in his, and his markings blazed so bright that Yuna had to look away for a moment. She had seen many things in her years as a doctor, but she had never seen anything quite as pure as the love shining from that father's skin. The door to the laboratory opened, and Taiho walked in. He stopped just inside the entrance, taking in the scene before him. The laughing human doctor with tears on her face. The weeping alien parents holding their glowing child. The young intern frantically trying to record everything on her tablet. "I heard screaming," Taiho said slowly. I assumed the worst. Yuna straightened up and tried to look professional, but she was still breathing hard from laughing, and she knew she looked like a mess. The procedure was successful, Chief Medical Officer. The cub has completed her awakening. Taiho moved closer to the bed, studying Bomi with his sharp eyes. The cub looked back at him with curiosity, her markings shifting to include cautious yellow. She did not like this strange bird-like creature as much as she liked her parents. Neural patterns, Taiho said, checking the monitors. They are completely normal. They are completely normal. More than normal. They are optimal. He looked at Yuna with an expression she could not read. You actually did it. You rebooted her consciousness, and it worked. I told you it would work, Yuna said. Then she grinned, because she could not help herself. Well, I told you it might work. Same thing, really. Taiho made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sigh of frustration. With his species, it was hard to tell. You violated 18 medical protocols. You performed an experimental procedure without proper approval. You risked the life of a patient based on nothing but theory. Yes, Yuna agreed. I did all of those things, and you succeeded. Taiho shook his head slowly. I do not know whether to punish you or promote you. Can I suggest option 2? Yuna asked hopefully. Before Taiho could answer, Bomi made another sound. It was not a scream this time, not a cry, not a questioning noise. It was something that sounded almost like a laugh. A small bubbling, delighted sound that made everyone in the room turn to look at her. The cub was looking at Yuna, and her markings were flickering with bright, happy colors. It was as if she understood on some basic level that this strange, furless creature was the one who had given her back the world. Yuna walked over to the bed and looked down at the tiny being she had saved. Hey there, little one. Sorry about the rough start. Existing is kind of overwhelming at first. It gets easier, I promise. Bomi reached up toward Yuna's face with her clumsy hand. When her tiny fingers touched Yuna's cheek, her markings settled into a pattern of deep, warm blue, trust, gratitude, connection, and despite everything she had been through, despite the fear and the doubt and the risk, Yuna smiled. Some days, being a doctor was worth all the trouble. Word spread through the station like fire through dry grass. By the next morning, everyone on Horizon's Rest had heard some version of the story. The human doctor who had done the impossible. The alien cub who had been brought back from the edge of death. The scream that had echoed through the medical wing, followed by laughter that seemed even louder. The reactions were mixed. Some species were impressed by Yuna's courage and creativity. Others were offended by her methods, calling her reckless and disrespectful to Torvani biology. A few of the older doctors demanded that she be removed from the station immediately for violating so many protocols, but none of that mattered. To Doan and Yumbi, they spent the following days in the recovery room with their daughter, watching her discover the world for the first time. Bomi learned to control her body quickly, as Torvani cubs usually did once they awakened. She learned to sit up, to crawl, to make sounds that were almost like words. Her markings changed constantly, reflecting her endless curiosity about everything around her. Yuna visited whenever she could, checking on the cub's progress and updating her medical files. Each time she entered the room, Bomi's markings would light up with that deep, warm blue that meant trust and happiness. The cub had formed a connection with her rescuer that went beyond normal doctor-patient relationships. She asked about you, Umbi said one afternoon, about a week after the procedure. Not in words, of course. She is too young for that, but she looks at the door whenever it opens, and when it is not you, her markings dim a little. Yuna felt her heart squeeze in her chest. She had always kept a professional distance from her patients, knowing that attachment could cloud judgment. But this tiny cub had gotten past her walls without even trying. "I am just the one who turned her off and on again," Yuna said, trying to keep her tone light. "You and Do-hwan are her parents. You are the ones who matter." "You matter too," Do-hwan said firmly. He was standing by the window, looking out at the stars. His markings were calm and warm, the colors of a father at peace. "You gave us our daughter. That is not something we will ever forget." 3 weeks later, Bomi was strong enough to leave the station. Do-hwan and Yoonbi prepared to take her home, back to the Torvani world where she would grow up surrounded by her own kind. There was a small farewell gathering in the docking bay, attended by the medical staff who had watched the miracle happen. Taiho was there, his expression carefully neutral as always. He had not punished Yuna for breaking protocols. In fact, he had quietly submitted her procedure to the Galactic Medical Database, where it would be studied by doctors across the galaxy. He never admitted that he was impressed, but his actions said what his words would not. Jie stood beside Yuna, her lavender face glowing with pride. She had played a small part in something historic, and she would carry that with her for the rest of her career. When she looked at Yuna, there was admiration in her large dark eyes. "Do you think anyone else will try the procedure?" Jie asked quietly. Yuna nodded. "I hope so. Now that we know it works, doctors can refine it. Make it safer. Use it to help other cubs who get stuck in the awakening loop." What happened here is just the beginning. Yoonbi approached them, carrying Bomi in her arms. The cub had grown in the past 3 weeks, her fur thicker and her markings brighter. She looked at Yuna with those newly awakened eyes, and her patterns shifted to blue and gold. "Say goodbye to Dr. Yuna," Yoonbi said softly. Bomi did not have words yet, but she reached out with both hands toward Yuna's face. Yuna leaned down so the cub could touch her cheeks, feeling those tiny fingers against her skin. "Goodbye, little one," Yuna whispered. "Grow up strong. Grow up happy. And remember that sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that work." Bomi made a sound that was almost like a giggle. Her markings flickered with bright pink and orange, colors of joy and excitement. Then Yoonbi pulled her back, and the moment was over. Do-hwan stepped forward and did something unexpected. He pressed his forehead against Yuna's, a gesture that she knew was reserved for family among the Tovani. His markings pulsed with deep purple, the color of profound respect. "You are part of our family now," he said. "Forever. If you ever need anything from anywhere in the galaxy, you send word to us. We will come." Yuna swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Thank you. Take care of her." "We will," Yoonbi said. "We will tell her the story of how she came into the world. How she was stuck in the dark, and a human from a young species came and found a way to bring her into the light. She will know your name, Dr. Yuna. She will know what you did for her." The family boarded their ship, and the docking bay doors closed behind them. Yuna watched through the window as the vessel detached from the station and moved away into the darkness of space, carrying a small miracle toward home. Years passed. Yuna stayed on Horizon's Rest, treating patients and training new doctors. Her reputation grew as word of her impossible procedure spread across the galaxy. Other doctors adapted her technique, and dozens of Torvani cubs were saved from the awakening loop. Some called her a genius. Others called her lucky. She just called herself a doctor who refused to give up. One day, almost 20 years after the miracle, a young Torvani woman arrived at the station. She was tall and graceful, with fur the color of storm clouds and markings that glowed in distinctive patterns of blue and gold. She walked into the medical wing with confidence in her step and curiosity in her eyes. Yuna was older now, with gray in her hair and lines on her face, but her mind was still sharp and her heart was still open. When she saw the young woman standing in her doorway, something in her chest tightened with recognition. "Hello," the young woman said. Her voice was musical, with the soft accent of her species. "My name is Bomi. I was told that you are the one who turned me off and on again when I was a cub. I have come to ask you some questions." Yuna felt a smile spread across her face. The tiny baby she had saved had grown into a beautiful young woman, standing before her with intelligence shining in her eyes. "Pull up a chair," Yuna said. "It is a long story, and I am getting too old to tell it standing up." Bomi sat down across from her, and her markings flickered with curious silver. "My parents told me the story many times. How I was trapped in a loop. How no one would help except one human doctor who had a crazy idea. How you laughed when I screamed at the universe for the first time." Yuna chuckled. "Did they tell you how angry you looked? Your little face was all scrunched up, and your markings were flashing like a thunderstorm. You were so mad at everything for existing." Bomi tilted her head, considering this. "I do not remember it, of course. But I have always wondered what it felt like for you. Were you scared?" "Terrified," Yuna admitted. "I had never done anything like that before. I was not sure it would work. I was not sure I would not make things worse. But I could not do nothing. That felt worse than trying and failing." "That is what my mother always said," Bomi replied. "She said you were the only one who would not give up. That is why she trusted you with my life." They talked for hours. The old human doctor and the young Tavani woman, who owed her existence to a moment of desperate creativity. Bomi asked about the procedure, about the theory behind it, about the years since. She was studying to become a doctor herself, inspired by the story she had grown up hearing. "I want to help people the way you help me," Bomi said. "I want to find answers when everyone else says there are none." Yuna looked at her with pride that she had no right to feel but could not stop herself from feeling anyway. "You will. I can see it in you. You have that stubbornness, that refusal to accept the impossible. You got that from your parents, but maybe, just a little bit, you got it from me too." Bomi's markings warmed to deep blue. "I like to think I did." Before she left, Bomi asked one more question. "Do you regret anything? About what you did for me? About the risks you took?" Yuna thought about it for a moment. She thought about the fear, the uncertainty, the condemnation from her colleagues. She thought about the sleepless nights and the crushing weight of responsibility. Then she thought about Bomi's first scream, and the laughter that followed, and the tiny hand reaching for her face. "No," she said. "Not for a single second." Bomi smiled, and her markings blazed with every warm color in the spectrum. "Good," she said. "Neither do I." She pressed her forehead against Yuna's, just as her father had done 20 years before. Then she walked out of the office into the station's corridors and toward a future full of promise. Yuna watched her go, and she felt something settle in her heart that had been restless for decades. She had done many things in her life, helped many patients, solved many problems. But nothing would ever be more important than the day she had rebooted a dying cub and laughed at the chaos that followed. Some stories were meant to have happy endings. This was one of them.